to an extent condemned. I'm not saying that, again, I should be honest, and I should say that I have used it at times in older patients when the acetabulum is terribly dysplastic, so that to see whether it stays in even after a supplementary procedure. But by and large in this age group, and try that, we need to see whether the hip is relaxed and without any tension inside the acetabulum, so that there are absolutely minimizes the chances of AVN. Because the more you try to fix the head inside the socket, you're not really giving any chance for the head to move, so the chances of AVN dramatically increases. So that's something which we should not be encouraging.
As in not putting a wire?
Some people, once the hip goes in, sometimes the idea is to remove everything from the cup, but sometimes you want to finish off the surgery at times, so you try to push the hip in. Obviously it's going to be unstable, so they just put a wire in, because I got a lot of cases through the trochanter, through the neck, through the head, into the acetabulum.
I've seen all different, but I don't use any wires at all. I've seen the
Yeah.
effects of wires that go through into, that have migrated into the pelvis.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you stabilize it? Very unstable, then how do you stabilize it?
It shouldn't be that unstable. There's something wrong. You've done something wrong in your operation that it's that unstable.
So if it,
That's the way of taking too much of it.
Okay, soft tissue there inside the stabilize.
so first of all, a proper open reduction, which means that you have to remove the obstacles, you have to clear the acetabulum, make sure that you see a deep enough socket, and you see what kind of a labrum the limbus is there, so that you at least have an idea that this is going to develop later once the hip is in. And then once it is in, then you find out, then actually my next talk is on a slightly older child, then I will probably be talking about these points. But then you need to be thinking about a supplementary procedure if it is required to make it more stable inside, and that is how you need. If you start forcing the hip in, it's as good as doing a closed reduction without anesthesia. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question, Ron? When you do a closed reduction and you do an arthroplasty, you have a reduction, it's not totally concentric, because you see that sometimes the limbo has been averted and still is not totally unfolded out.
Right.
Do you keep this patient on a plaster, or do you think that is an indication for an open reduction?
It's an indication for open reduction. If I'm not able to reduce it closed with the child totally
Actually,
relaxed.
It's reduced. You have a reduction, but it's not totally concentric, because there is some soft tissue that you have to do it open. It's a pulvinar that it's too thick, something that really gives you a little bit of a lateral movement of the femoral head. But what I have been seeing in our experience when we do that, although it's not a perfect reduction, but if it's stable with the motion that you get in the next 6 weeks, so usually we tend to keep these patients on a plaster for 6 weeks, and I can tell you that all of them get a concentric reduction by the end of the 6 weeks.
If it's forcing me to put the hip in a lot of abduction and lot of internal rotation.
No.
Okay.
If you do that, then it's because unstable. So if you have a reduction that's not totally concentric, but it's stable, we tend to be a little bit conservative.
This has been published.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait for about 4 weeks if the thing doesn't thin off.
Yeah.
It doesn't get more concentric. You discard.
No, but how can it become more concentric if
There is a concept of bedding in where the tissue that's interposed, that I would set it off, just dies. Gets necrotic and dies, and then it beds in.
in closed reduction?
Yeah.
We're talking about closed reduction.
Close reduction.
But it has to be reduced. Otherwise, you don't leave the femoral head out and expecting to go in.
Even though you have a medial dye which is more than 6 millimeters.
Not
In,
6 millimeters, no, less than.
oh, then of course. I mean that I just talked about it. I mean, if it is less than 6.
Is a completely made up number, because what magnification are you doing this X-ray on? Where are you measuring 6 millimeters? What do you mean? You take an X-ray in theatre on an image intensifier, you can blow it up to any magnification, and then say that's it.
That's
This is all made up. So this is a feeling that you're getting that there's too much of a...
I agree. I mean, you have to take a decision on table in this particular instance. Yes.
But generally, there's a big study from Turkey by Hakan where if you leave a little bit of gapping, it does tend to bed in, but those hips tend to need secondary procedures more often. So do they more often need a pelvic osteotomy done? Because the asthma just doesn't develop. That's the only issue.
That was my other question. When do you consider the age limit to do a second procedure like a pelvic osteotomy? Because you have shown that, and we have seen this, that you get a very close reduction and then you don't see the SL index improving as fast as you want. Until when do you wait?
Well, when you're talking about specifically pelvic osteotomy, or you're talking about any supplementary procedure?
Any supplementary procedure, but usually, in my experience, I would go to a pelvic osteotomy.
Not before 1.5 years, I mean, definitely, but depending upon, even then, unless probably, this is not, I'm not citing any paper or any study, but if the acetabular index is very high, or and there is a kind of a dysplastic kind of a, I see a limbus which is not well formed operatively, and the child is maybe more towards 2 years, then I would probably definitely think about a supplementary procedure. But at 1.5 years, if I have a good limbus, even if the acetabular index is about 35, even then I would give it some chance, because I think, we have studies which tell us that, there is a lot of scope for, once it is reduced, a lot of scope for the acetabulum to develop. Sometimes you can miss out on the anteversion, but the acetabulum can develop once it is reduced. In fact, I'll be talking about that in the next, is it my talk again? Yeah, all right, sorry.
One last question.
Sure.
I'm Dr. Sanjay Das. You see you are reducing, but it remains unstable. Do you suggest wire fixation?
No. Wire fixation is only to be mentioned to condemn.
No, it is going inside, it is reducing. What comes out?
No, it should not come out, because if a hip goes in, generally in about 30 degrees, 35 degrees of abduction, not more than that, and not more than 10, definitely not more than 15 degrees of internal rotation, the hip should be very stable in this age group. And invariably it is.
If it remains unstable, then you go for wire.
Then you need to see whether you have actually cleared up the acetabulum and removed the obstacles of the... Oh, sorry, you're talking about the close reduction. I stand corrected, sorry. Then you need to obviously go for OR, yes.
I mean to say, do you suggest any wire fixation?
No, absolutely not, no.
Having said that, we talked a lot about wire fixation, but one of the JPOs recently had that from the Saudi Arabian group, where they talked of posterior wire dysplasia and dysplastic head, where they actually fixed the wire, and that helped them to retain the head.
No, I myself have, it's not that I'm not, I'm not saying that I'm not used. In older patients, when the acetabulum is totally dysplastic, the child has been operated twice, and that patient comes to you. You don't have any other options, because whatever you do, even a DEGA cannot take care of the posterior coverage. It's impossible. So you need to fix it for at least 6 weeks and then remove it when you change the spica. That's how I've done it. It actually has worked, to be honest, but not on a regular basis.
Not the first time.
Only for certain situations.
Okay, we are going to be talking about a 2-year-old now, older child. Again, a 22-month-old, this is nearly 2 years, but 22-month-old, something which was not detected at birth, but noticed abnormal gait when the child started walking at 15 months. And the parents had visited several doctors but did not take any decisions regarding management. A lot of, people did offer the appropriate management, but there was no other problem. There was actually a history of DDH which was not very clearly documented. On clinical examination, a waddling gait, bilateral limited abduction of the hips, bilateral telescoping positive, a neurologically intact child, and this was the initial X-ray. And you can see both the hips dislocated, and this child had been walking for about more than 6-7 months. So you do expect that the hips are going to go up, but fortunately the femoral ossification nucleus are pretty much okay. They look good on X-rays. So in this, we talk to the parents that we have to do an open reduction definitely, do an adductor tenotomy on both sides. Of course, this was done in 2 stages. One hip first, And then in that, we could have done both the hips on the same sitting, but there were other problems, but some technical situations. So we ended up doing the second hip 3 days later, which I sometimes tend to do if I have to do both the procedures, femoral and pelvic. So in this case, what was striking here is, even though it was a high riding kind of femoral heads, and this kid had a wonderful, when we cleared up the acetabulum, the socket was really deep, and there was a nice limbus. That's what I was talking about. So this is the time when we had to decide, what was best for this child. Obviously, we knew that we had to do some secondary procedure. The child was 2 years. So, and like I said, the overlap of femoral epiphysis, once we put the head in, the overlap of femoral epiphysis over ischium is a good sign. Tested hip stability, hip was more stable in abduction and internal rotation. And we did a supplementary procedure. We actually did a varus derotation osteotomies of the femurs. We didn't do a pelvic procedure. And the protocol that we followed was 6 weeks, bilateral hip spica, constant supervision during spica application with an adequate posterior molding, which decreases the redislocation, and followed by a bilateral half band spica for another 6 weeks. The follow-up, this is after 6 weeks, this kid after 12 weeks. The check X-ray after 12 weeks, I usually use the brace for a couple of months. I don't know, I don't know whether that's, whenever I don't do a pelvic procedure, I feel more comfortable using a brace. And this brace was weaned off after 2 to 3 months. And this was after 18 months. He was clinically absolutely fine, and this was the X-ray. The acetabular index on the right side was 26, on the left side was 30. It was just 18 months. And this kid, actually, the last X-ray, I don't have that X-ray, I wanted to bring that X-ray. The last X-ray, the right side was about 24 or maybe 23, and the left side was about 25. So this was roughly about 2 years, or maybe even more than that, 22 months after the surgery. So by and large, we were happy with what we did. And just talking about the X-ray, nowadays we are talking about the medial gap. The superior gap is also seen on the X-ray, as defined as the distance between the center of the femoral head metaphysis and Hilgenreiner's line. And and the medial gap or lateralization is defined as the distance between the calcar of the femur and lateral pelvic wall at that level. So these are the two more things that you would like to see on the X-ray to let you know what's going on in the follow-up. But supporting this management, Weinstein talked about the natural history and treatment of outcomes of children hip disorders in his clinical orthopedics and research. The majority of the acetabular development is determined by the age of 8 years, the watershed year. And if the restoration of the femoral head in its anatomical location inside the acetabulum occurs after 6 months of age, normal acetabulum and femoral development may never be restored. So, in fact, just more emphasis on the fact that you need to pick up these DDHs and treat them as early as possible, get them concentrically reduced so that you get a good outcome. Again, Powell, Ian et al. Talked about the open reduction of congenital hip dislocations, the risk of avascular necrosis with 3 different approaches. Again, from the same place, the Newington Children's Hospital, Connecticut. And this study was interesting because it reviewed 49 hips with CDH. Partial AVN can occur when anterior open reduction done after an initial traction and arthrogram. At that time, they used to give a lot of traction. And they talked about a partial AVN, which could occur then. The risk does not increase when you combine a femoral osteotomy with OR, but along with an inanimate osteotomy, at that time, a lot of Salters were done, had the highest risk of AVN and highest rate of additional surgery. So this was the conclusion that this particular paper, talked about. And to conclude, anterior approach gives one a very good view of all the obstacles, especially the capsule. I don't do medial approaches. I think the papers have talked about medial approaches only in infants, younger children. Older children, I would prefer an anterior approach. I don't know about the panel. And varus derotation osteotomies, the pros, easier with less risk of AVN, and cons, it's a separate incision, but it's easier. Pelvic osteotomy, pros, no separate incision, you just can extend that bikini incision and do the osteotomy. Cons, difficult with more risk of AVN. So the carry-on message, concentric open reduction extremely important to achieve good results. The above a prerequisite for any supplementary procedure planned along. So anything that you plan along, you need a prerequisite is a concentric reduction. And the choice of the supplementary procedure should be in accordance to the per-op findings on performing the test of stability after the OR. Thank you.
I've got one query. In the such old cases which are walking with a waddling gait, we always presume that they will contract the gluteus medius muscles. Why you not recover traction for a few days to make the muscles relax and to go forward?
Surprisingly, though the hips were very high, when we did a traction with the child under anesthesia, there was a lot of laxity. And actually the hip came pretty much close to we actually did not do any shortening here or anything. So that's a good point that you said. If it was probably a 3 years plus or a 4-year-old child, usually we don't, even if the hip was coming closer to the acetabulum, even then I would do probably a centimeter or something of shortening so that the hip, comfortably goes in. But 2 years, in fact till 3 years it's a gray area whether you should do a shortening or not. But definitely after 3, shortening whether you get the hip down or not.
So I've got a few comments. So, the traction issue is an interesting issue because the structures that are stopping you getting the hip down are not the structures that are going to be lengthened in any way by traction. So even if you want to do stretch out gluteus medius, you have to put the hip in the position of 45 degrees abduction along the line of action. If you want to stretch out psoas, you have to put it in a different position. So that's the problem with traction. It doesn't actually stretch out the things you want to stretch out. That's number one. Number two, we don't use medial approaches at all anymore. The last paper that came out of England showed there was a 27% risk. This one
I agree. I don't use it at all actually.
Number three, for the last 5 years I've not done a femoral osteotomy. We don't touch the femur at all anymore. We think the problem's in the acetabulum. There are lots of other papers that don't show an increased risk of AVM, so that's one paper. But
Yeah.
It's very difficult to explain why you get more AVM when you do a pelvic as opposed to femoral when the blood supplies on the femoral. So it just doesn't make sense. So we don't do shortening osteotomy, we don't do various derotation because you're taking a problem that's an acetabular problem where the hip is ended up here. All you want to do is get the acetabulum correct because it's a primary acetabular displacement. So that bilateral case you showed, we see lots of cases like that. I always do a synchronous bilateral open reduction with pelvic osteotomy.
All right. I've got 2 comments. Yeah.
Because even your cases that you showed, Shenton's line still broken. Even though it looks great, it's still not sitting quite correct. And even when the acetabular index improves, it doesn't become completely normal, and they lie slightly subluxed. And if you look at the long-term outcomes of hips, where the Shenton's line is broken and this is sitting out slightly laterally, they're weight bearing wrong in their sourcil and they'll wear out perfectly. So you have to get the acetabulum right. You can do whatever you want to the femur, but at the end the femur doesn't matter. It's the acetabulum that has to be correct.
No, what I'm saying is, what you're saying probably pertains to a younger child. Because acetabulum, once the DDH is there, it's established, you have the acetabulum primarily, the problem in the primarily in the acetabulum in the younger child and nothing in the femoral head initially. But as the child grows older and starts walking, there are papers which tell us that there are changes which occur in the femoral head also. So it's not just the acetabulum we are worried about. I'm not even talking, there are papers which support, so I'm just trying to play a kind of a devil's advocate. So what I'm saying is that you cannot ignore the problems in the femoral head when the child is older. You can say what you said, that the primary problem is in the acetabulum and there's nothing in the femur in a younger child, less than probably 6 to 8 months. But beyond that, when the child starts walking, then I think and second thing is,
In less than 18 months, there's usually not a problem.
Yeah.
In the femur. And by 18 months, they're old enough for you to be able to do a pelvic osteotomy. So my point was, as they get older and older, you might want to do a femur, but the problem is still in the acetabulum. You have to do something about the acetabulum.
No, in this particular case, I didn't feel the need to do anything in the acetabulum. That's what I'm talking about.
But that's exactly what I mean. Is that it's not a sense of feeling. The fact is that's still dysplastic. And once you're over 18 months and you're going into that hip, you should do something to that pelvis. Well, that's our philosophy.
Okay.
Is it, sorry, is it the same osteotomy which we do in the prosthesis for containment of the hip?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So where is derotation? In fact, you make sure that the derotation is adequate for the hip to be stable. And you see, when in this particular case, the sockets were so good. See, that's what I'm talking about. Sometimes you take a decision based on what you see and how the hip is stable. Just a question. What pelvic osteotomy do you do?
I use the Dega.
Okay. I only do Dega nowadays. And I'm very comfortable, I'm very comfortable with Dega. But in this particular case, I just thought otherwise and I did a femoral osteotomy. Now, you talk about, whether the femoral osteotomy would interfere with the blood supply. Well, you are outside the joint anyway when you are doing this. So,
No, but I don't understand why a pelvic osteotomy increases your risk of AVS.
I don't know, but the paper, I just showed you the paper.
No, that's one paper, 46 paper. I can show you all the other papers where it
Right.
that's
Basically the papers say that if you combine both the pelvic and femoral, then with the OR, then the risk increases. I think there are papers which say that. But any one of them doesn't increase the risk. That's also a paper. Yeah, you're right. That's fine.
It's a simple procedure which we did. What do you feel?
Not-
I realize that it's a simple procedure, and when I started my career, my boss used to do all femoral osteotomies because it was easier. At that time, we're talking about 30 years ago, people were not so comfortable about going into the hip. So I think that, femoral derotation osteotomy with that kind of a varus was an easy procedure that people would feel comfortable. But actually, you are creating a deformity in terms of trying to improve the concentricity of the acetabulum. And what I could see from those patients, because I have been following up them for a long time, and actually, when they come to adolescence, they were walking in a funny way, because actually, they were retrovated. So actually, I saw that the acetabulum were not increasing. The acetabulum index was not getting better as fast as it's supposed to. And, by 10 years later on, 20 years ago, we completely abandoned all the femoral osteotomies and started to do the pelvic osteotomies. Because that's where the disease is. And that's where you should, that's where the money is.
So the history behind femoral osteotomies in England is Lloyd Roberts and Fixon, who worked at Great Ormond Street. They used to do open reductions and then put the hip into this sort of position to get it in a spica. And then at 6 weeks, they'd say, that doesn't look right, so do an osteotomy below to derotate it. And that slowly transmuted into, let's do an open reduction plus femoral. And that became the sort of British Great Ormond Street standard philosophy. And that's just stuck. It's only recently that people said, why are we doing that? Why are we doing stage operations?
No, but you have to agree that whenever there is a dislocated hip, you have a exaggerated femoral anteversion. So how do you explain that? And you have to correct it at some point. Why do you do a femoral?
But there's, if you compare the other side, the normal hip, they also have increased.
But they don't have a dislocation.
That doesn't matter. The anteversion is not the problem.
No,
Even the normal hip there's anteversion, and that corrects over time. And you're creating a secondary problem. And I don't think you have to. When they get a lot older, you might need to shorten it to bring it down. But the problem isn't in the femur. You don't do anteversion operations on.
All right. Let me put one more question. Now, so when you do Dega, are you taking care of the anteversion of the acetabulum, the retroversion acetabulum? Are you taking care of that? Do you increase the wedge posteriorly?
So that's the exact reason why I do a Dega and not the Salter. The Salter, the risk is that you retrovert.
Right.
It's great on the table, but then as you follow it on over the years, you can see the crossover sign. You know that you're making a face back. With a Dega, it's very difficult to retrovert. You can provide lateral and anterior, but the posterior wall is intact, and you're not changing it. So that's what we've been doing. So we've written 60 odd Degas out in DDH and LC.
I'm happy that we are having this discussion because I'm always, I don't just fall on a pelvic osteotomy always between 1.5 and 2 years. It's always beyond 2 years that I'm, if I have to do one supplementary procedure, I will always do a pelvic procedure. But it is between this 1.5 years and 2 years that I'm not too sure whether we should be totally doing a pelvic. That's my.
I don't know if you want to ask if there's
Yeah.
any questions from the audience?
इसको हो गया ना? इसको निकाल दो उसको. Okay.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I've been waiting a long time to be heard. It's lunch time. I know that it's the wrong time to speak. I try and be brief. There are some areas which we haven't touched and something very peculiar to the Indian scenario, So I think it's important, and that's why we won't break for lunch till we finish this, But I'll be very quick, Now, Manuel wanted me to search a 9-year-old, but incidentally this 14-year-old came to the OPD just a couple of weeks back, last 2 weeks ago or something. This 14-year-old female presents with a limp and shortening of the lower limb, left lower limb, since she started walking, and X-rays reveal a dislocated hip on that side. She has a shortening of 5 centimeters, fairly good range of motion. She has a Trendelenburg positive. She is lurching, What do you advise to the family? Treat or leave her alone? So, she's caved in that way. There's a false acetabulum. The femoral head is small. She has a coxa vara. The acetabulum.
No pain.
No, she is painless. So we are meant to actually vote, and I don't know how many vote for treatment, But the mother knew that she had a dislocation from about 15 months of age, but she was only scared of surgery. Finally realized the girl has become big, probably coming to a marriageable age, and she is limping, So she.
The pelvis is tilted on this side, the affected side. It's tilted like this. What the length of the limb? See the X-ray, because otherwise it will be.
Frightening you to do the surgery on the right side and make it as big as that.
Huh? क्या बोल रहे?
5 centimeters out of the other side.
हाँ. Sorry, I didn't get you.
Shorten the other leg.
Shorten the other leg, okay. Yeah, that may be an option, But the mother really wanted her to be better, Yeah, please.
Pelvic support osteotomy with lengthening of tibia, that will satisfy the inequality.
Okay, so that is to be added here to the option, the pelvic support osteotomy, because some people did advise her a pelvic support osteotomy. So would you go for an open reduction? Do nothing, first of all. Do a pelvic support osteotomy. Go for an open reduction with a femoral osteotomy and shortening, or open reduction, femoral osteotomy, shortening, and a pelvic procedure. So I think most people don't want to do anything, so the option doesn't remain, And if you opt to do anything, would you want any investigations first? Do you want MRI, CT, or any other investigations? MRI. Why? Cartilage. Okay. Okay, so there is the MRI. Since the mother was very keen, we discussed all the pros and cons with the mother, We offered doing nothing, we offered doing a pelvic support osteotomy, but she wanted that joint to go in, you know. She said, no, put the ball back where it came out from, you know. And so we asked for an MRI, and the MRI was, the idea was to study the cartilage. We talked about that. These are not degeneric scans, but you see a fairly good layer of cartilage. Yeah, there's something more, I think. Okay, anyway. So the cartilage was not bad from the MRI report, you know. Having discussed with the MRI person, he said that the cartilage is not bad and is of fair thickness, and if you want to do something, go ahead, you know. So we did an open reduction with the femoral shortening, femoral osteotomy. This is the head at the time of surgery. The cartilage wasn't bad, but the ligament teres was stuck to the cartilage. That was taken off, and this is what she had, you know. Now she has a shortening of 5 centimeters, so I was not really worried about shortening. I was worried about getting that hip in from where it was very, very high and stuck up. You know, so we did that. We actually gave her a coxa-vara. The idea being that we need to lengthen her later, and if we need to do something, we can definitely tackle the coxa-vara. Yeah, go ahead.
One question. You see the size of the head on this side?
Yeah.
This is quite smaller.
Yeah, so actually this is the whole discussion I sort of wanted to provoke, you know, whether we should be doing something or should not be doing. I'm not saying that what I've done is right or wrong, you know, but the pros and cons, you know, so we try and understand the pros and cons. A very small head, coxa-vara, short neck, markedly high femoral head in a 14-year-old, acetabulum not really, no bit of congruency anyway, you know. So what should we have done, you know, should we have left her alone? But then you see that it's not too bad, you know. It's not too bad, and she came very recently.
Did
Yes.
you do anything to the acetabulum? Because
No, I didn't do anything to the acetabulum. Sorry?
it really improves.
Yes, we didn't do anything to the acetabulum. I didn't do anything to the acetabulum. So this is a recent picture, you know, after the implant removal. She came last month, I think, and this is the thing. That video is actually meant to work.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Now, you know, I have also done something similar, but I always found.
Look at the video there, because that will go away. Sorry.
It's fantastic.
Her abductor now is about 3+. She still has a limp.
I brought a video before the surgery.
I have them, but for brevity, I have the video. I can show it to you right away. If you wish, after the session is over, I show it to you, because I have the video before surgery too. In fact, there are lots of pictures, as you would expect in a case like that. But then, it's more than 20 slides for this particular case. Yeah, please go ahead.
When you did this open reduction, I'm sorry I'm interrupting.
No problem. It's meant to be interactive.
Why I'm asking you is because I find that when you see this kind of a thing in an older child, the posterior acetabulum is totally, there's no support at all. In fact, I have ended up doing a shortening and using that small piece as a kind of a strut to prevent and screw it in to prevent the hip to go back.
Right.
I mean, you didn't do anything to the acetabulum.
No, I didn't do anything to the acetabulum. I think the morphology differs from patient to patient. There are patients with very poor posterior wall, and they are prone to dislocating. So in that case, you fix your femoral osteotomy in such a way that the head points forwards. You know, it should not be retroverted. If it's retroverted, it will go back and out. You know, and if you're doing a pelvic thing, we tend to do a posterior Dega. Dega is sort of sighted more posteriorly. You know, these are the two steps I would take in that situation. So just coming to the problem of neglected DDH, as compared to the problem has already been highlighted, muscle shortening. So because the femoral head has gone up, the glutea are shortened, the hamstring is short, the iliopsoas is short, everything, adductors are short. Then there is the problem of capsule, you know, the way the capsule actually migrates, the head migrates, it takes the capsule, and the capsule has numerous adhesions everywhere, you know. And you really need to know how to bring that capsule down, you know. Then adaptive bony changes in the femoral head and acetabular changes. So this is what I said, the flexors, adductors, abductors, and the extensors, which are the glutea as well as the hamstrings, they're all tight in this situation, and you need to tackle all of these. And femoral shortening is a wonderful way of tackling some of these areas, for example, the hamstrings. Because you can release other things, you know, but the hamstrings you can't reach from the front. So if you do a femoral shortening, and depending on the length of the hamstring, the femur adjusts itself and you can bring the head down. So the degree of overlap which you see there, the degree of overlap, you just excise. So that is the degree of overlap. On very gentle traction, whatever is the degree of overlap, Hay-Gross described this long ago, and we've been using it for the last my very first few cases, we didn't do it because we were not very familiar with this. When I just finished my residency, no one was doing these surgeries. But then very rapidly we started using this. So now for more than 20 years we've been using this, and I can vouch for this procedure even for teratogenic hips, which otherwise are difficult to reduce, arthrogrypotics, and I've done it as early as between 6 and 9 months of age. So there is a role for femoral osteotomy in certain situations, and shortening I think helps a lot in these cases. It allows you to lower as much as the head is above the acetabulum, the center of the head to the center of the acetabulum. Generally that will be required. There are of course certain changes which happen because you may give a little bit of flexion, extension, etc. to the osteotomy, but generally that is the mode.
In this regard, what is the role? Here is the role for a preoperative traction, even a skeletal traction.
It just won't work in this patient. It's so rigid at the age of 14 it won't work. And there is no sense doing traction here. She was 5 centimeters above, really. So this allows lowering of the femoral head, allows better reduction of the femoral head. It reduces pressure on the femoral head and lowers the rate of AVN. So femoral shortening is very, very useful in these cases. Now the capsule, depending on how the head migrates, the capsule can get stuck to the lateral wall of the ileum, and I always lower it down, And sometimes you can have this situation where you have a constricted capsule. So you open the capsule and you think you found the acetabulum. Actually, it's the inner wall of the capsule. And then if you take the head away from there, you find that narrow isthmus, and you really got to do a circumferential or at least a substantial release of the capsule to be able to get into the acetabulum. So capsule has adhesions superior, posterior, inferior, pericephalic and isthmic, and they need to be reduced. So lower the capsule, divide the capsule and separate it from the head. And then the femur problem, as Ramni was talking about, in the older children there is definitely a problem. Sometimes coxa valga, sometimes coxa vara, increased anteversion, and these may demand a varus or a similar osteotomy derotation may be required. So for a femoral osteotomy, the prerequisite, of course when you're doing femoral shortening, it's something different. We fix the head in the best position and then cut the femur accordingly, bring it to a neutral position, so that these rules don't apply. But otherwise, when you do a femoral osteotomy, you center the head properly, overcome the femoral deformity, avoid overcorrection. I think this is very, very important. And relative contraindication is avascular necrosis because there won't be any proximal remodeling, in these cases. Best results, C angle 0 to 10 and an acetabular index of 20 to 35. You get a best result with this. In the acetabulum, you would have an increased slope, increased anteversion, increased valgus and a diminished depth of the acetabulum. So you need to take care of all these factors, So if your acetabulum is small, you have to search of ways of augmenting it, maybe by a shelf procedure in those cases, In these late cases, ischial valgus also is a big problem. You can't get a concentric reduction because the ischium is moved out, So acetabular changes would demand one of these three, redirectional, acetabuloplasties, and I also, my last Salter has been done about 14 years back, so I haven't really done a Salter for so many years. We've been doing Degas since then. Acetabular deepening, shelf or Chiari. So this is a one-stage surgery because you do it at one go, and that's how you can get the hip inside. You have a low incidence of AVN and low incidence of redislocation. There are lots of pros and cons. To treat or not to treat was the question, So should you do it? Should you not do it? What are the limits and what are the results? And there's a lot of papers on this subject, generally in experienced hands, This is a significant problem, formidable problem really. It requires a patient to be fit enough to withstand a major surgery, a well-equipped OR, and a surgeon who has the required expertise and skill, because this is not something for the first timer. I think there are a lot of traps. I think this is the most tricky area in pediatric orthopedics, at least I feel. Because even now sometimes it happens that I have a problem, in the case which I have done, which will be the subject of the next topic, Okay, so further management for a coxa vara and shortening, will be required in due course, and we planned that a year apart now. Okay, let's see how that femoral head develops, and how the acetabulum develops. It'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few years. For a THR, yeah, sure, for a THR. Okay, this we're talking now of revision surgery, and this is again not an uncommon scenario. I mean, a DDH surgery has been done, but the patient presents to you with the hip out. So in this case, the left hip. This child was 2 years old, I think, when. So this is first post-operative picture. In March of '98, he was operated, and then he presented in May with the head out. So the treating surgeon actually, he sent him that something has gone wrong and the hip is out. Can you do something? So how do you manage such cases? You know, the patient had just come out of spica, and surgeon took a X-ray, said that the hip is out. Now what do you do? Do you immediately rush in to do a surgery? How do you manage? Do you mobilize? You mobilize and reoperate, or do you leave them alone? You know, I think everyone is very hungry. No? Sorry, reoperate. But I would tend to mobilize them once the hip is, once the hip has a good range and good active movements, and then we go in to do the surgery. So this is post-op 2. So this was in 1909. Femoral shortening, varus derotation, and an acetabuloplasty. I think that was Salter type of procedure which was done. And this is in 2000. The long-term follow-up, 2002, 2005, see how the hip behaves. This is his function. And this is very much required in the Indian environment. You know, you need to be able to squat and sit cross-legged. And this is 2008. This child is now, I think, about 17. So this is his most recent picture. You know, he had come this year. So that's possibly, I don't know what Manoj will say. Probably some over coverage. I don't know. Maybe a little bit. You know, the anterior angle is a bit high, on the high side. But this is his. This is just one case I picked up because we have loads of revisions because of the surgeries being done by people left and right, and then they fail, you know. So when we talk of complications of DDH treatment, you know, one of the big problems, of course, in inexperienced hands is redislocation and subluxation. Other problems is residual dysplasia, deformity of the acetabulum or femur, avascular necrosis and growth disturbances, FAI, which Manoj talked about, femoroacetabular impingement. Then you can have problems of stiffness and neurovascular injury. So a lot of complications can happen. Stiffness can be, for example, because of infection also. So infection gets covered there. Open reduction, there is an incidence of redislocation depending on the approach. Different papers have quoted 0 to 8% in the anterior approach and 0 to 55% in the medial approach. When we see the literature, you know, again, in this series, this is also from CHOP, 49% of the patient required secondary procedures. So open reduction without femoral osteotomy needed a secondary procedure. In this particular group of 42 patients, they had groups where they did only open reduction pelvic procedures and open reduction with femoral procedures. The conclusion they reached that where you don't tackle the femur, the incidence of secondary procedures are very high, you know. Maybe because they didn't touch the acetabulum, I don't know. But as far as redislocation is concerned, the most common reasons for failure were a dysmorphic femoral head, an abnormal femoral version, greater pelvic width, decreased abduction in the spica cast. So this is 22 patients who had successful open reduction, with 22 who required a reopen reduction. This is again from CHOP, this paper. When the femoral head is not normal, and there is an abnormal version, and you don't correct that version, the chances of dislocation are high, you know. So, and in females, if the pelvic width is greater, technically it becomes a little difficult to reach to the acetabulum. Other papers actually, earlier papers, most common cause for redislocation was inadequate exposure and failure to release the obstructing soft tissues. Technical failure is usually the cause for redislocation in unilateral cases, and the outcome is usually poor. And the most common cause of failure was improper exposure and release of the tight inferior capsule and the transverse acetabular ligament. So most of the pathology is on the inferior side, and if that is not tackled, you tend to get a redislocation. And of the cases which redislocated, only 20% hip showed no radiographic deformity in follow-up. So on the negative side, there's a lot of morbidity in terms of either the X-rays or in terms of clinical use of the hip if you have a redislocation. In one series, 100% of the cases redislocated, and that's because of obviously a technical failure. So primary incomplete reduction. So you have failures for two reasons. Either the reduction is incomplete, so de novo, the head has not really gone in, or it's an unstable reduction. An unstable reduction means some factor has not been considered. So when you talk of unstable reduction, so we talked of the unreduced hip, we already talked about that. But when we come to unstable reduction, there's a change in the head shape, increased anteversion of the femoral head, increased valgus of the upper femur, increased anteversion of the acetabulum, increased slope of the acetabulum, and a diminished depth of the acetabulum. So these factors are very, very important to correct, Now you can have a situation like this. This child had, I think, 72 degrees of anteversion. And now if you were to just put this in and possibly do a pelvic osteotomy, really 72 degrees is very high compared to 19 degrees on the opposite side, The version is very high. The acetabulum is not bad as far as the version is concerned. So there are exceptions to the rule, and I think each case is individual, each case needs to be analyzed and done. Acetabular dysplasia, I mean, we are all familiar with this, and this will need tackling. And then iatrogenic causes for revision, excessive derotation of the upper femur. So when you actually retrovert the upper femur, when you are correcting the anteversion, but you do too much, the head will go posteriorly. So you reduce the retroversion. If you have too much of retroversion, you have a posterior dislocation. Excessive diminution of acetabular anteversion. You retrovert the acetabulum like in a Saltus, in combination with the femoral retroversion, definitely the head is going to go out. So combination procedures here. So this is the sort of thing. You have a retroversion, and if you imagine that this posterior wall is dysplastic, this is the anterior, that is the posterior, this wall is dysplastic, you retrovert the femoral head, so there is a condyle here and there is retroversion, it's very easy for it to go out. So remedy is to control the derotation of the upper femur. I think this is very, very important because we randomly tend to do it. You need to check after you have done your surgery, just check whether the hip is remaining stable in different positions. Adequate varus of the upper femur, controlled retroversion of the acetabulum, restore the slope of the acetabulum, acetabular index is to be restored, and restore the depth of the acetabulum, the C angle of Weiberg. You try and get it to the correct value for that age, at the primary surgery. Okay. Are we very hungry? I have one more case. We'll be very brief with this. This is a 12-year-old female presented with limp and shortening. I finished with DDA, this septic arthritis. She had actually septic arthritis of the right hip on the 9th day. It was detected late, so by the time actually treatment happened, she was a month old, She was treated with aspirations and antibiotics, and multiple abscesses were drained, So this is the initial picture. You can see the osteomyelitis which is there, it's marked out. Lot of osteomyelitis, and couple of months later, about 5 or 6 months later, this was the situation. You have a head there, you have a shaft here, nothing in between. What do you do? I think a lot of surgeons from India must have seen this sort of a situation. What do we do in this case? Any suggestion? Why 3?
It's a number,
Magic number.
to see how it develops.
Okay.
Sometimes you can have, although it looks like a full necrosis of the upper extremity of the femur, sometimes later on you can have some kind of developing of the bony aspect.
Yeah, you're free to investigate if you like. I never said you can't investigate. You could do MRI and see what is happening there, or ultrasound. No, this was at the age of about 7 months. She was 6 or 7 months at that time. 96. This is very old. Okay, so nothing was done. So these are the different options. Observe. Sometimes when we see this patient, we tend to put them in cast and keep them in cast for 6 months, 8 months, 1 year. In the olden days, I've seen that happening. And otherwise, you could operate. You fix the pseudarthrosis. You put a graft. Sometimes you do a displacement osteotomy in the olden days, or a valgus osteotomy. So all these were done, This particular patient elected nothing to be done, we just waited, and you see how the things are developing. About 8 years later, she ossified very well,
Did you get an MRI scan?
We had, but at later date, not at that time,
So you did the MRI at the age of 3?
Nothing, not at the age of 3. I don't know, because I didn't bring the MRI here, so I don't remember when. So this is 2006, this is 2010. She was about 14 at this age. You can see the trochanteric overgrowth, the coxa vara, etc. So, but functionally she was very good. Functionally she is good, Trendelenburg negative, and able to squat.
How much she was in plaster to start when she was young?
The earlier treatment was elsewhere, but as I remember now, we have the notes with us, but about a month, I think. Only a month, nothing more. And then she was sent off, and then she came back to the treating surgeon with that sort of a picture, then referred. So this girl, she had a coxa vara correction and lengthening, because she had a shortening of about 3.5 centimeters, So this is following lengthening. This is at the age of 15, and this is last year's picture. She comes annually, so she should be due to come now. So this is the situation.
For coxa vara?
With the fixator, we corrected it. With the orthofix as an arrangement, so you can do coxa vara as well as lengthening. You see that has not been really very successful. We got her from 110 to about 124 degrees. July, at the last follow-up, she had 124 degrees of, but that comes within the range of normality. So the thing what I wanted to talk about septic hip coxa varas, because we have a fairly rich experience. I don't say we have dozens of cases, but we have fairly rich experience with these, and we tend to find that they tend to progress, in terms of coxa vara. If they don't heal up fast, they tend to go down. So 2008, 2011, and 2012. You can see that the head is sinking, the shaft is migrating up. Okay, this is here, that is there, and this is here. This is very important clues on successive X-rays. Something is going wrong, something needs to be done. But this patient presented at that stage. The Hilgenreiner epiphyseal angle is very, very important, and I don't know if all of you know the Hilgenreiner line and a line drawn through the physeal separation or the actual pseudarthrosis. And this line, normally about 25 to 45 degrees, deformities will spontaneously correct. Okay, more than 45, 60 degrees or more, well, the deformities invariably progress. And there is a gray zone between 45 and 60, where you need to keep a very close watch. So progression is related to more the Hilgenreiner epiphyseal angle, more the progression. Now this is from work on congenital coxa vara, but I think the same applies to a septic hip. So management principles here are: monitor the radiological indices successively. Progressive coxa vara needs correction. Restore the HE angle to less than 40 degrees. So when you do your coxa vara correction, the Hilgenreiner epiphyseal angle should be less than 40. Post-septic coxa vara is usually progressive, especially in cases of pseudarthrosis. This demands early stabilization and correction. You keep a watch on them, but if you find them sinking, you need to do something. You can't leave them alone. An ancillary problem, the short neck, because the physis is not growing, so the neck is short. Elevated trochanter and limb length discrepancy, all of these will need attention. So thank you. I think we have time for lunch now. Yeah, please.
One, I saw you lengthening the femur with a uniaxial fixator. Are you happy with it?
Very happy.
I would love
Where there are no deformities, I'm very happy. We have big series.
My second question is, have you ever had the opportunity of using some tubular graft or something in such pseudarthrosis? I mean, did you feel the need for it any time in any of the
Actually, long ago, I think post-residency, we did one where we used it, but that failed, After that, I never done it, If at all we do a coxa vara correction, just do a valgus osteotomy, or we leave them alone, just watch them, But if we find them sinking, we immediately go in for a valgus osteotomy. We have put screws through that pseudarthrosis, Screws, yeah, with the valgus and screws through the pseudarthrosis.
Sure. One of the questions is because dealing with, I don't have too much experience with septic arthritis in newborns, but I realize that some of them ended up with a necrosis, total necrosis of the proximal femur. And here, I think it was a different approach.
Yes.
What do you do for those patients?
not opening. It's T1. Oh, what's going on there? Sorry. Okay, good afternoon. I hope you had all a good lunch, so you have your strength back to listen at some trauma cases. Maybe this will be a little bit more interest for you because maybe it's your daily practice. And you're going to start with some simple cases. There's a little bit of discussion about the clavicle, and I bring you this 11-year-old boy, fall over the left shoulder, pain and deformity over the clavicle. You can see here how does it look on the X-ray, and also the clinical aspect. There's no vascular or neurological complications. So the question is how to manage this situation. Who would go for a sling? Just a sling? No show hands? No sling? Yeah? Figure of 8 bandage? Yes. Most of the people. And open reduction and internal fixation? Nobody. Okay? Let's go a little bit over the discussion. Actually, when you look at this, between the simple sling or a figure of 8 bandage, there's no real evidence that shows that there is a difference between using one or the other. I think although all of us are very familiar by using a figure of 8, why are you using this? Some of you respond to figure of 8. Why do you feel that it's better than using a sling?
It just reduces to some extent, not 100%.
Okay. So you want to use some traction and feel like, because you are afraid you're going to have a shortened clavicle. And actually, this is one of the problems that we are concerned about. The truth is that we have several articles now, before we go to what is the evidence. There is some article special related to the adult, and this makes us think. Because, you know, the problem with dealing with children and adolescents is, when are we treating them as children? Where should we treat them as adults? Because there is a certain age that you don't know exactly if they are a child or if they are becoming an adult. But when you look at about the fractures of the clavicle, if you look for the old papers like this one's from 1990 and 1968, what do they tell you? That the clavicle possesses an excellent potential for healing, and thus, with this exception of case of open injury, neurological vascular compromises, we all go for a close treatment because it has been accepted as a gold standard, and you know that most of these patients do well. Again, this paper from 1968 from Rowe, that non-union was higher in the operatively patients than the non-operatively ones. And this also was one of the reasons why to treat, and we're talking about adults, how to treat the fractures in a conservative, non-operative way. But we also have to understand that in 1968, probably, the way we were dealing surgically with these patients is a little bit different than we are doing nowadays. So the question here is, what will be the indications for surgery in a child or in an adolescent? Will be a cosmetic, having a bump. Sometimes I have these parents and it's very hard to convince them, well, this is a bump, yes, but it's going in a way. They don't feel comfortable about this, so maybe they are pushing too hard on this aspect. Short shoulder, we say that's the reason why we try to use a figure of 8, so it's our concern. Lower performance in the shoulder. If you think about an active athlete, maybe you'll have some consideration that that shoulder is not going to perform as well as supposed in comparison to the other one. And then there is also this risk of non-union, and mostly apply for the older child or adolescents, if you want to say. So, is this something of concern for you? Probably not so much. And again, talking about children, you would not figure out about this idea. So, let's see what the evidence is now, or trying to get out some evidence, because I feel that it is very difficult to get an evidence on how you should treat the clavicle patients at this age group. But if you look at this article by Michelle Kerr from Michigan, that when you think about comparison, and we're talking now about the old adolescents, when you compare them treated non-operatively in adults, show higher rates of non-union than original noted. So there is a concern, if you look at the adult population, that actually a lot of these patients, like 15%, ended up by having a non-union. So will be this the same for the late adolescents? And also, when you look at the patient outcomes, because you are talking now about the 21st century, so it's a little bit different from what passed before. So patients' outcomes are different, and their expectations are different though. And it shows unsatisfactory outcomes that covers 1/3 of these patients with a fracture of the clavicle. So are we changing our attitude after learning a little bit of this? Would you treat these patients surgically? Would it depend on the fracture type? What do you think? You is going to change your attitude, or are you still going to treat this conservatively? Who is going to be treating conservatively still? Sorry? I tried it conservatively. Yes, I guess, most of all of us will treat this in a conservative way, non-union, or non-operatively, I mean. Although I think you should be a little bit careful, and every patient should be looked individually, because we still don't have right measurements to say we should go non-operatively or operatively. Traditionally, we have been treating these patients non-operatively,